Have you ever seen a render and wondered why your materials don't look that amazing? Today, I'm going to show you how to fix it with Blender. Nothing in the real world has a perfect surface. There are always scratches, wear, and dirt. Details that tell the story of that material, and that is what makes them perfect. Let's explore professional techniques for creating hard surface materials, using concepts like curvature maps, ambient occlusion, and noise textures. And for that, we don't need advanced programs like Substance Painter. Everything is inside Blender. If you don't have much experience with the shader editor, I recommend watching my previous video about materials first, because today we are going deeper. So if you are ready, download the model with the link in the description, and let's get started. First of all, make sure to have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled in the preferences. This will help us with the connections of the nodes, and it's also important to have good lighting set up. The file I left you already has HDRI lighting, but you can customize it if you want. So let's move to the render view and we can start. For this process, the first step will be to work on the base color. We don't want a flat, uninteresting base color, but rather one that is much more dynamic. And for that, we can use the curvature. So, for example, here I arrive and add a color like this yellow. This little robot looks like plastic, but it looks completely polished and manufactured, as if it were fresh out of the factory. And we don't want that. We want something much more interesting. So I always recommend starting with the geometry node and connecting the pointiness to a color ramp. And with this color ramp, we're going to control the curvature a little bit to get some details like these. And with this, I can use a color mix node to give this model a dynamic color. In this case, I want yellow, but much more dynamic. So for the lighter tone, I'll use a vibrant yellow, and for the second, an orange. This way I have a variation in color here. I can adjust these sliders a little to give me more contrast and connect it to the principal BSDF. And this would be the first result. I can adjust the mask a bit more. And you'll notice that with this, we're starting to get into some much more interesting tones. So that would be the first step. We can do it with the curvature, or we can use any other node configuration. Such as this camouflage texture that I simply made with a noise texture and then on top the influence of the pointiness, giving me a result like this. You can play around and create all sorts of crazy and fun things like this. For now, we are going to stick with this base tone, and that would be the first step of this material. To start organizing this, I'm going to select this little group, which is the color, and press F to put it in a frame. And in the M panel, I can name it and also add some color to identify it better and keep things more organized. The next step is to add some wear and tear to the edges. All hard materials eventually start to show some wear. If you look around you, you'll surely find objects that show wear. For example, your keyboard, the table you're at, your chair, or any hard object generally wears out from use. The idea with this mask is that we take this plastic material and carefully remove certain sections, thereby revealing the underlying base material. In this particular instance, that base material will be metal, which clearly indicates that this is a surface that has been painted. So for this mask, we're going to need 3 nodes. We'll need a geometry node, a bevel node, and another node called vector mat. The idea here is to take the normal of these first 2 nodes and use an operation called the dot product. This will cancel out the information from both nodes, leaving us with only the edge information as a result. If we visualize, here you can slightly see an effect, and to make it more contrasted, I'm going to create another node called map range. I'm going to plug it in here, and I want the mask to be white, so I will invert the values below. I will change the one that is at 0 to 1 and the one that is at 1 to 0, and then we can start viewing this mask. To make it more intense, I'm going to raise this value, trying to get a number that's very close to 1. For example, I'll set it to 0.95. So with this, we now have the mask. And what I want to do next is blend it with this specific color node. So I'm going to create a mix color now. I'll connect the color right here, then we'll visualize, and I'll connect the mask to the top part, and this will be the final result. Remember that this other color, I really want it to be metal. So I'm going to search for a more metallic tone, perhaps a gray color, just like this one, and then I'll connect it to the base color, and we'll take a look. So there, we can see that we already have a first change of color. And since we want to reveal that the bottom part is a metallic material, then I will also connect this mask directly to the metalness. Remember that masks in metalness make black non-metallic and white metallic. So if we activate it again, we already have that effect. Look how nice this material is starting to look. Here, the base metal we have is already beginning to reveal itself. I'm also going to adjust this mask a little bit more. And the bevel's radius, I'll reduce it just a bit so that it becomes smaller, but also more contrasted. So I'm going to increase this here to 0.99, and that makes it much more contrasted for me. Well, this mask right now is extremely even, and I want it to have some irregularity. For that then, I'm going to add a noise texture, and with Ctrl-T, I'll give it object coordinates. I'm going to adjust the scale. I'll increase the detail to the maximum and add a little more roughness. And I'm going to connect a color ramp here to make it much more contrasted. Something more or less like this, and we're going to connect it with the node that's above. I'll select both the map range and the color ramp, then press Ctrl-0, and I'm going to set this to multiply mode. Alright, and this is how it turns out for me. So I still have the mask in place there, but it's a little more irregular. I'm going to go back and check my principled node, and this is the outcome. So with this, we would have completed the first part of the wear effect. We already have the base color and the metallicness set up, and now we just need to adjust the mask for the roughness. I'm going to create another color ramp here, connect this multiply, let's visualize it. I'll connect it to the roughness, and for this material, I want both colors to be an intermediate roughness value. For the painted part, I'm going to look for a light gray tone, more or less around here. And for the metal, which is the right side, I want to find a light gray tone as well, but a little bit more textured. I'm going to visualize, and this would be the result. I'm going to adjust it just a little bit more. I want the metal to be brighter, to be less reflective. And similarly, I want this one to be a little less reflective, and I end up with something like this. I feel like it looks quite good there. And finally, for this wear mask, I also want to add a little bit of relief. So for that, I'm going to create a bump map. We can use this texture that we have here. I'm going to connect it to the high. We're going to adjust the intensity. I'll gradually lower it by 0.2, and I'll also lower the distance by 0.2, and it's still very intense. I'll lower it more by 0.02, and I'll connect it here to the normal, and we'll review it. And as you can see, we've got this subtle texture now appearing on the surface. I'm going to zoom in a bit closer, and I'm also noticing that the texture is actually eating into the metal, and it really should be the other way around. So I'm going to click on Invert here so that the paint is properly sitting on top of the metal. I'll also make it a little more contrasted using a color ramp. Alright, something more or less like this. There, we're left with a little bit of depth. If we pull back, I feel that it's still too intense. I'm going to lower the strength a little bit more, because I really want it to be incredibly subtle. Our goal is for this material to remain friendly, so it doesn't appear too aggressive. And with this in place, we've now completed the second step, which is the wear mask. I'll just quickly organize these nodes a little, and then we'll move on to the next step. What we'll do now is add another type of wear, but this will be a kind of damage across the entire surface, and this will give much more visual interest to our character. We'll create a noise texture. We can use this same one. I'm going to press Ctrl-Shift-D to duplicate it, but keep it connected. I'm going to move it over here, and then I'll press Alt-P to take it out of the group. And I think we can lower the scale a bit. I'll set it to 5 and connect it to a color ramp, which will be a much more contrasted color ramp. Something like this, that's quite contrasted. And I'll also reduce the roughness because I have too much detail. Okay, something around here, and in fact, I'll disable normalize so it's much more drastic. And finally, I'll add a little bit of distortion. This is how this mask looks right now. Alright, so then we're going to combine this mask with the other parameters. I'm going to create a color mix here, and then I'll place it over here. And I'm going to connect all of these outputs to replace the one that was there before, and we'll connect the color right here into the factor, and then we're going to make this mask completely white. We're going to review the final node, and this is what the result looks like. This is how we achieve this wear. Something you can see is that the color in this wear is too blue. It's practically this pure color. So that it doesn't have so much influence, what I'm going to do is take this white tone, which is the influence of the wear, and make it a little bit more gray. This way, we're giving it a little bit of a yellow tone influence on top, and likewise, we'll connect it to the bump. I'm going to duplicate this node right here, connect this as the mask, and we're done. Here, however, almost nothing is noticeable, so I'm going to add a little more distance to it once again, and still, the texture is barely visible. So I'm going to do a little trick here. For this value, I'm going to set it to 5. And at this point, you can clearly see the effects of this wear and tear. So if we then examine our entire model, we'll observe a noticeable amount of deterioration, and this is precisely how we managed to achieve a significantly greater visual interest. We only have one step left to finish this material, which is to add a bit of dirt to the surface. For that, we're going to use ambient occlusion, which is a mask that highlights the areas where less light reaches the model, which are the same areas where more dirt tends to accumulate. I'm going to create an ambient occlusion node right here. I'm going to visualize it, and since I want to use it as a mask, I'm going to invert it. I'm going to create the invert color node, and this is the final result. So, ambient occlusion has two distinct modes. One of these modes is global, which calculates the occlusion for all objects, and if we activate only local, it will then only add the occlusions from objects that are individually separated. In this case, I want a bit of information from both, so I'm going to select these two and duplicate them. I'll leave one with the global influence and the other with the local influence, but for this one, I want to adjust its size. I'll give it 0.1 so that the influence has a smaller radius. I'm going to mix these two nodes with Ctrl 0, and I'll add both whites together. And there, we have the information from both nodes. So we have our base material, and what we can do since the dirt is going to go on top of the whole model, is to use this mask and mix this shader with another principled BSDF. Then I will duplicate it, and here I will create a material that is dirt. I'm going to search right here for a grayish tone, something that is more or less dark, and I'm going to fully increase the roughness setting to 100%. And I'll grab the two principal BSDF nodes, press Ctrl 0 to mix them, and put the mask here on top to blend both shaders. And honestly, the influence here is barely noticeable. I'm going to visualize the original material right here, and now, with all the dirt, the change is quite insignificant, so I'm going to add a color ramp to make it much more intense. I'm going to place it right here, then we'll check the mask, and I'm going to move this white slider just a little bit to the left until we start to get some noticeable dirt. Here, we can definitely see it more clearly now. Likewise, in this upper area and throughout the entire model in general, it now appears a bit dirtier. I'm going to adjust it a little bit more and also reduce its intensity a little so that it's not purely that. And we can also try here playing around with some tones, for example. I can make it slightly off to the side. Something like this. But I really think it actually looks just a little bit better if we make it slightly warmer. And that's it. Then with this, we would have completely finished all the material for this little robot. I'll quickly drop these last few nodes into a frame for better organization. I'll give it a color to make it easier to identify, and then we'll do a quick recap of everything we've accomplished here. The very first thing we did was to extract pointing us information from the geometry node to create an interesting base color for our model. Then we created this mask to blend it with the base color and reveal the metallic material from the layer underneath. Then we added a little bit more wear and tear to the surface, and finally we created the ambient occlusion mask, which we then blended with another shader. That's how we generate the dirt, and our little robot is already super happy with its procedural material. And with this, we finished this video on creating professional materials for hard surface models. In the upcoming video, we will see how to work with materials for organic objects, which requires a very different approach. And if you want to learn from scratch and master not only materials, but also modeling, sculpting, and much more, I invite you to take a look at my complete course for beginners. You have the link in the description. I am the Parabox, and remember that at each vertex there is a universe of possibilities. I'll see you in the next video.